Hello everyone, and welcome to the Sydneyist, a weekly conversation about what it means to live in a city and how we can help Sydney in particular become its best self. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly here at Eastside Radio on 89.7 FM, eastsidefm.org, or on the Eastside Radio app. We're focused on Sydney, but the issues we discuss each week affect cities everywhere, from cycleways to affordability, from water to waste, and from public housing to private tollways. Cities are habitat. For most of us, they're home, so we owe it to ourselves to get interested. They're also, by definition, contested space. We at the Sydneyist think this is a good and healthy thing, although it means that the debate is inevitably political. But we aim always to approach these issues in a spirit of equity, openness and respect. Definitely, this is our motto, no whinging. Today's episode of The Sydneyist is all about democracy sans elections. Will it be better or worse? First of all, I want just to run through some planning news because we're a city-making show. We're looking at city-making issues, and there are a few things that have come up during the week. First of all, the NIMBY wars are hotting up. NIMBY, as you remember, stands for Not in My Backyard. Now, there's a new thing called YIMBY, which is Yes in My Backyard. In an interesting precedent for Sydney, possibly, the Andrews government of Victoria proposes to remove neighbours' rights to object to nearby or adjacent developments, so long as those developments have a proportion of affordable homes. That'd be interesting. Just imagine it coming next to you. Meanwhile, the Minns government in New South Wales has identified 11 suburbs and 3,231 pieces of public land for redevelopment. They threatened this earlier, a few weeks ago, and now they've identified a list including psychiatric hospitals, which we have to hope is not including the Cumberland Hospital, excuse me, and disability centres, as well as suburbs that include Everleigh and the Haymarket, as well as Camellia, Schofields and North Parramatta, which was recently saved from huge rezoning proposals. Now, again, the heritage reservoir of North Parramatta seems to be at risk. The public-private battle continues in a move rubbished by our favourite developer, Harry Triguboff. The Minns government proposing to expand Landcom's role to include not just flogging off bits of public land, but also building on it, which could be, again, for better or for worse. Also, in similar vein, the Inner West Council has announced that it will turn public car parks into housing, although people there already complain that there's not enough car parking, as I suppose we all do. And meanwhile, closer to home here in Paddington for us at the moment, and at Nielsen Park, Shark Beach is set to remain closed for yet another summer due to works happening rather slowly on the sea wall. But over in Parramatta, meanwhile, the wonderful new pool, which is set into a sunken circle, if you will, at the top of Mays Hill in Parramatta Park, is almost complete and due to open any moment in time for the spring. So that's quite exciting for Western Sydney. Now, though, I want to go straight to our wonderful guest for this evening, Luca Belgiorno-Nettis, who has a number of distinctions, including being a director of Transfield and a very important supporter, of course, of the Biennale in Sydney. But for our purposes, it's probably more relevant that he trained as an architect and in 2004, I think, founded the New Democracy Foundation, which is dedicated to finding alternative modes of governance which might restore the trust, our trust, that is to say, in public decision-making. Welcome, Luca. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
So we have some really interesting conversation to have tonight about how democracy might be improved if we removed elections. I often recall George Washington's farewell address to the nation when he said, and I'm quoting, that the party system, if it continued, would enable, quote, cunning, ambitious and unprincipled men to subvert the power of the people and usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. It's impossible, of course, reading those words not to think of Trump, but we're conscious everywhere, I think, and especially perhaps here in New South Wales, that democracy seems to let us down, that it doesn't seem to be very good at representing what we think we want done, in particular, of course, with regard to global heating. But do you think that democracy carries within it the seeds of its own destruction?
Ooh, that's a big question.
It is a big question.
It is a big question. I'm actually reminded of the architecture of democracy, and indeed, I think the way we do democracy is I think it's kind of better to think about the specifics. So here is the way we set our parliament up, which is this horseshoe space,
yes,
which is great for debating, but it's not actually very good for dialogue. And I've just come back from Dublin, where they've had their 6th Citizens' Assembly, and they do it in a big square ballroom where people are seated at tables of 6 to 8, and they deliberate there amongst themselves. Yes, they have a plenary.
Yes.
But so that is kind of a better way of actually discussing issues rather than having this standoff.
Yes. So that's really interesting. The horseshoe shape, which doesn't pertain to all parliaments, but most of the Westminster parliaments, and certainly in the New South Wales one, which is I think it's beautiful, very tight, very oppositional, isn't it?
Very
it's
much
very
the bear pit.
Yes, absolutely. And the crossbench is quite narrow.
Yeah, that's right.
Sadly, I would broaden out the crossbench and have the... Yeah. But that's actually, it's a deliberate representation, isn't it, of the party system, which is what
yes,
was talking about.
Yes, and I think it was sort of...
two parties.
And even the Greeks did it that way in their bull. It was still a horseshoe, even though the representatives were selected by lot rather than by election. It's still... It strikes me as not being a very good way of discussing topics and arriving at consensus.
Interesting, isn't it? A friend of mine said on, I think it was Facebook today, when I was talking about this episode, and she said, surely you can't have democracy without elections. Isn't that a matter of definition of democracy?
Well, yeah, I think it's a bit like... the habits we get into, like, the definition of the woman's place was at the home, so
yeah, we're done with that.
That's right. So we could be done with the elections as well.
Yeah.
The problem with elections, well, the good thing about elections in a way is that they're entertaining.
Yes.
People advertise their vigour and their competency by, great oratory and persuasive rhetoric. And seeing an argument on, whether it's on a soapbox between, two outstanding candidates or on television or wherever, is quite entertaining. Yeah. And you get to see both sides of an argument. But in fact, what happens is there's no real incentive to arrive at a consensus there. It's just about, let's just, persuade whoever about my position and not try and find common ground.
In fact, there's no real incentive, I think, for the arguments to be made honestly. Having recently been through 2 New South Wales elections myself, and I remember thinking it's really interesting because this is a device to select for all of the characteristics that we actually don't want in our leaders, all of the kind of self-aggrandizing and sort of self-promoting characteristics.
I agree. I've used this line before. I think the problem with elections is they conflate personalities with policy development.
Indeed.
And so it's conflating political ambition, personal ambition with public policy. And we should try and moderate that. And that's why we think having these citizens' councils selected by democratic lottery as a complement, at least to start with, is a good way of showing up that there is another way of affecting representation and policy development, but also potentially, in time, seeing which one works better.
Yes. So I should, for the sake of the listeners, explain perhaps that Luca has kindly come and spoken to some of my students at university on several occasions, and one of the things that he typically says, and I think often begins with, is the possibly slightly startling assertion that the first democracy, Athens, was run without elections. So is that right?
Correct.
And does that make it a good model, do you think?
Well, it is the first model of democracy in the Western world that we're aware of, but most people just think about it as being an elected parliament, and it wasn't. What happened is you've obviously got the Pericles of the world, who were these outstanding generals who often spoke very persuasively, but the reality was that the Greek system was made up of two main institutions, one of which was a space called the Boule, where the representatives were selected by lottery, and the other was the assembly, where anyone could speak. And often, of course, the most competent and well versed in rhetoric spoke, and Pericles often was the one who was one of the leading orators. But there you have it. Is firstly, there was this parliament that was selected by lottery, not by election.
And how did those two? This is a matter of curiosity. But how did the two bodies relate to each other in terms of
the assembly? Actually, the Boule, to start with, the one with the lottery, set the agenda for the assembly, and then the assembly voted on it by show of hands.
Yes.
And any male, of course, that was the time, any male citizen, Athenian male citizen, could go to the assembly and vote and talk, for that matter, as well. So yes, there was this very interesting relationship between, if you like, the expressive public aspect, which was the assembly, and the more deliberative one, which was the Boule, where they set the agenda.
Critics of the Athenian system often point out that, as you say, that it was limited to male citizens, and that meant, I think, property owners. So, and that it didn't include slaves, foreigners, women, helots, and so on. But I imagine, I suppose, the same went for the people elected or appointed by ballot as well.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
But imagine too that your argument is that pool can be expanded to be much more diverse.
Yes, of course. But the beauty about the Greek system, in fact, that this was the reason it had such a success at the time, was that, and I'm talking the Athenian system in particular, was that all male citizens, rich or poor, so they didn't have to be actually property owners.
Oh, okay.
They just had to be citizens.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's a small improvement, I suppose.
Yeah. That's right.
Nevertheless, yes. So let's talk about the citizens' jury, or I think sometimes you call it the citizens' assembly, but how that might work, just in terms of how the nuts and bolts, how you do it, how you make it happen.
Well, essentially what we're trying to do is obtain, and we use this term, a mini public. So we're trying to get a reflection of the broader community into this room, whether it's 50 or 100 people, or it can be 25, but usually people want to see a bigger number, not just a jury of 12, to be seen to be more representative. So if you've got a 50 to 100, the issue is, in fact, I just mentioned I came back from Dublin, and did I mention that already, or did we do that before?
Briefly.
So that room was 100.
Yes.
So that's the number that they're using regularly now. So that
seems like a lot for a conversation, doesn't it?
But yes, it is. But at the same time, when people see, so the conversations, as I say, happen around the small tables of 6 to 8.
Yes.
No more than 6 to 8.
Yeah.
And so, and then those deliberations get aggregated, and it's quite amazing to see. In fact, most people have no belief that this is possible.
Yes.
Unless you actually have to see it.
Yes.
And in fact, we'd invited a number of Australian politicians to join us in Dublin. Unfortunately, they were all busy. But it's well worth seeing. Yeah.
Yes. I think it's fascinating and I think one of the reasons we think 100 people in a room is going to be, is because of our experience of elections, which is that the sense of, this cacophony of just everyone shouting at once and nobody listening, but it's probably completely different.
Yes, that's right. And there are, in the way the Irish do it, they have note takers at each table who are not the participants, not the 100, and those notes then get aggregated up, as I said, to computer-wise, so that the sense of the discussions are found where whatever the common thread is in those discussions, they're brought out through that process. And we usually have this metric, which is this threshold that if 80% of the room agrees on a subject, then that's consensus, and that often happens.
Isn't that interesting? I've heard it said that this is a way of accessing popular wisdom, what you might call popular wisdom. Some people might call it common sense, I suppose, and that is also a quality about which it's easy to be cynical. But I believe, and I haven't witnessed one of these myself, but I have heard lots of discussions about them and reporting back, and I've seen legal juries in action. I believe that it does. People who take part do have that feeling that there is a kind of shared wisdom which is being accessed in some way.
Look, I can't tell you how most people who've experienced this, the vast majority of people who've experienced it are so enthusiastic about the process. Yeah. They become total converts. And you renew your faith in people generally. Yes. I mean, you obviously get you get a proportion of people, minority that are just complete jerks and don't want to know about it and try to disrupt things. But that's the way that's the way of the world. Yeah. But mostly they work extremely well when the process of the is done properly.
Yes.
Clearly, if you get 100 strangers in a room and you just let them go at it, it becomes a town hall meeting and, everyone jumps up, wants to scream at each other and whatever. There's a real number of rules, if you like, that have been learned over decades now to how to run these things, and not least of which is that everyone should be given an opportunity to talk around the table. So these note takers and facilitators are ensuring that the people who are usually the most confident and charismatic and great speakers don't dominate those tables.
Yeah. It sounds fascinating. Just run us quickly. We'll have to break in a moment, but just run us quickly through the process of selection and how that works and how you make it fair.
Well, we usually use a so-called stratified demographic process whereby you determine that you want to match that broader community in this mini public, so you want to have the same gender proportionate as in the broader public, the same age, the bell curve, if you like, from young to old, and around that, and you want to have the geography, so depending on the community, so you can use a few other demographics, if you like, and income, so you can, if you say who's renting and who's owning in the initial pool.
So would you adjust those parameters according to what the subject was?
You could, but generally speaking, it depends. If you want more younger people into the issue or whatever, but generally you want to try to keep them as minimum stratified elements, because otherwise you feel that people argue you're trying to trick
you're interfering with the randomness.
You're interfering with the random. So you send out, say, to here in the eastern suburbs, in the electorate of Vaucluse, the state electorate of Vaucluse, you'll send out 20,000 invitations randomly to addresses,
which is selected by a computer.
It's just selected by a computer, and you ask those people, would you like to be involved in this process and put your name up to be in the pool? And if you're lucky, you get 5% responding. Yes, but. And from that 5%, you select your 100, and then you just do this check to make sure that 100 is reflective of those parameters. If you've got 50% male, female, you might have to tweak it a little bit to sort of get random select further from the larger pool.
Okay, fascinating. Yeah. We are going to have a quick break now. We're going to listen to a song called John Lee Hooker for President by our favourite Ry Cooder.
first came to town, people, I was walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, and I heard a lot of people talking about the White House. I decided I'd drop in there that night. When I got there, I said, man, what's shaking? They said, look, man, you can't come in here. This is where the president hang out. What you want? I said, look, man, I'm John Lee Hooker. I sing the blues. They said the president don't have time for the blues. I said, look, man, everybody got to have the blues sometime, no matter where you're from or where you're at. So I decided to make a run for president. Yeah, I know everybody got the blues, because I'm in touch with them when I sing. It's my life. I got the #1 record in Detroit right now. It's called Boom Boom. Yeah, it tells a tremendous story. These lyrics are something else. I want you to dig it and pick up on it. And every time you hear boom boom, that's $1 change. I don't need your money, because I finance my own campaign. I ain't for sale. I keep a fat back roll in my pocket, baby, big as a hay bale. Yes, sir. Now I want everybody to know I'm strictly copacetic. I ain't Republican or Democratic. I got a new program for the nation. There's gonna be groove time, a big sensation. Every man and woman gets 1 scotch, 1 bourbon, 1 beer, 3 times a day if they stay cool. And little children gets milk, cream, and alcohol 2 times a day if they stay involved in school. Now boogie children.
That was the wonderful Ry Cooder with a song called John Lee Hooker for President, which perhaps wouldn't be such a bad idea, actually. I think it was Plato who said we should have philosopher kings. It's an idea that I've always liked myself. Anyway, I'm here in the studio with Luca Belgiorno-Nettis, and we're talking about whether democracy would work better in a fairer, cleaner, more honest and more intelligent way if we scrapped the idea of the election. So, Luca, I want to just ask you a little bit more now about how, we've talked about how the jury is selected, but how it actually works. How do you persuade people, I suppose, to give up time? How much time does it take? How do you make sure that people are reasonably well across the issues and that sort of question?
The first issue is that the people who get these invitations, the public at large, need to feel as if their voice is going to be important. So unless they get an invitation from a government or some such, they're not likely to respond. So that's why we at New Democracy tend to concentrate on trying to encourage governments to go through this process so that they can send out the invitations. And so that's number one. Secondly, yes, it'd be good if they paid. Most people can't take days off during the week, so these juries happen. The days that they happen are on Saturdays, every second Saturday for 3 months. So it's important that they're given time. So we usually talk about 40 hours face to face, and in the interim, of course, they can read it as they wish, and they're also given childcare if they need it, and other facilities, obviously catering and the rest, What else?
Access to experts to educate.
Oh yes, of course, of course.
Yeah.
Initially, the commissioning government agent will have a brief, and that brief on whatever the issue might be. If it's housing affordability, it will be these are the issues about housing affordability, rental, whatever, and then through this 40 hours, the participants themselves can then talk about, well, we'd like to hear from this other expert rather than that one, and they
get little lectures or talks or books.
Correct. That's right.
That's cool. So, look, I'm conscious that once again we're going to run out of time because the conversation is so interesting that we could talk forever. But I just want to ask you. I know you've had lots of experience with running these, and you've run some on nuclear waste, and there was one on the City of Sydney, at least actually two, I think, one about the lockouts and one about 2050 strategy, and there are some very good international examples, which perhaps we could mention very briefly. But also I want to ask you about how we could apply this system here, now in Australia, to better our cities, I suppose.
Well, as you mentioned, there was this jury that we ran for the City of Sydney on the City of Sydney's 2050 vision, and there were some great recommendations that came out of that. So that's for the city to embrace. That is a space to be explored further.
Yep.
But on the question of housing affordability, well, we were
such a big issue for us now.
Yeah, correct. And we were fortunate to see the independents, the crossbench led by Allegra Spender and even Jackie Lambie and Mr. Wilkie come out supporting the notion of a citizens' assembly for housing affordability.
And how big a jury would you select for that? Because it's such a huge issue.
Well, we think once again, people need to feel as if there is a good representative cross section, and it doesn't need to be 100, but 50 could do the job. There's also this other question of the incentives that the participants have. The bigger the group, the less incentive they have to actually apply themselves.
Yes.
That's why of course
some people feel like sitting back and
let the others run it. So there's that tension.
One of the interesting questions for me is if we're looking at affordability, which of course is incredibly complicated, and our governments at the moment tend just to say, well, more housing is better, so we're just going to give over all this land to developers and they can do whatever they like and double it if they want to. That's a temptation in the sense of more is better. But is there a way of adjusting a citizens' assembly about affordability so that we also build into the question quality so that we get better cities and better housing and better streets out of it? This is calling on your architectural background now.
well, absolutely. Whatever the issue is, the burning issue, the wicked problem, it can include questions of livability.
Yes. Yeah. And how to strategize that and how to work towards it. Yeah. I'm going to have to stop there. I'm terribly sorry. We at least another half hour for this conversation, probably more like 2 or 3 weeks. Anyway, I have to say good night to everybody. Thank you so much to Luca Belgiorno-Nettis for being here and being such a wonderful guest. If any of the listeners have good ideas and questions you'd like us to address, please drop us a line on the Sydneyist at eastsidefm.org. In the meantime, we will take a short break. We've got a few